I realized that right before I get into a really aggravated, aggressive stance, it's almost always for me been triggered by shame. So the shame comes first and then comes the rage. And then I drop out of relation and become, pretty attacking, predatory, as Dan Tatkin would say, go into predator mode. And so when I learned to catch the shame, I could then see it as a small person that needed reassurance. And I could kind of I would look at her and sometimes imagine picking her up. And I would literally say to this part of myself who was feeling shame, you didn't do anything wrong. You're great. You can get behind me. I have to go deal with this other adult. I got to go do an adult thing. This has nothing to do with you. And it was amazing how reassuring that was. It was like the anger just dissipated.
Welcome to Therapist Uncensored. Building on decades of professional experience, this podcast tackles neurobiology, modern attachment, and more in an honest way that's helpful in healing humans. Your session begins now with Dr. Ann Kelly and Sue Marriott. Hope you enjoy a preview of this full episode published exclusively as a bonus for our incredible online neuro-nerd community. This group is the backbone that keeps this podcast thriving, and you can find out more at therapistuncensored.com/join.
Hey everybody, 2 very quick announcements before we get to our bonus episode. First, Ann and I are really excited to be launching our full-length course called Beyond Attachment Styles. If anybody wants to do a deep dive into any of the tie-dye, blue, red, basically the attachment activation patterns, then this is for you. We also offer CEUs for therapists. In addition, Ann Kelly and Delinda Spain are hosting the Vitality Series, which is a monthly set of live meetings where you get together on Zoom with your fellow travelers in the world and connect and work to support one another. It's fun. It's not your ordinary self-help sort of situation. So it's a good time. You can find out tons more information about both of these events and other things that we have going on always at therapistuncensored.com/events. All right. We hope you enjoy this bonus episode. Hey, everybody. Welcome back to Therapist Uncensored. I am very pleased to bring you a colleague, a long-term colleague, and someone I really respect, and her name is Krista Jordan. Krista, could you describe yourself, please?
I'm a curious person. I think that probably has been the guiding force in my life. Is just I'm curious about everything. I'm curious about people in the world and about myself in relation to other people. So yeah, I think that's probably what drives me as a person is I'm curious. I'm also a wife. We have our 25-year anniversary coming up in 2 months, quarter century. And I'm a mom of 2 amazing young adult kids, and I'm a psychologist. So those are also all important roles for who I am.
You're also a leader in the PACT community.
Yes, I'm on the faculty of the PACT Institute, which is the brainchild of Dr. Stan Tatkin's The Psychobiological Approach to Couples Therapy. So it's a really rich, juicy, amazing amalgam. Stan's a synthesizer. So he cooked up this stew of interpersonal neurobiology and Gestalt therapy and Ericksonian trance and Masterson's psychodynamic personality disorder therapy and attachment theory and social justice. Those are the component pieces, and put together not only a theory, but also a series of exercises and guiding principles to help couples achieve a secure pattern of relating between the 2 of them. So we like to say that even if you didn't get secure attachment in childhood, you can achieve it in coupleship. And that's the whole goal of the therapy. And so I'm heading up their research branch, and we are in the process of collecting data on our first outcome study to hopefully show empirically that PACT is great at helping couples reshape their relationships.
That's fantastic. And Stan has been a guest on the podcast before, and I know that many of our listeners are familiar with him and love his work. So part of what brought us together for this particular podcast was both of our interest in disorganized attachment. And I always think of it as the stepchild of the attachment categories. People want to forget it, and it's been neglected and very, very poorly understood. So hopefully today we can suss it out a little bit and learn some as a researcher, as a clinician, and then as a human. You have your thoughts and experiences with this. So why don't we start there around where you've landed and what has made you interested in this?
Well, I'm an experiential learner. I joke that one of the great parts about being a therapist is I can receive all my own treatments, which if I were a heart surgeon, I wouldn't be able to do so easily, or a lot of other professions. So I'm often experiencing my own types of therapy, both because I'm a human and I need therapy, but also as a way to understand a modality. And so in trying to understand attachment theory, and that journey started around 2008 when I met Stan, I wanted to understand my own attachment. So, and having a background in research, I was very keen on getting it done in a way that I knew was evidence-based and founded in research. And that's not as easy as I wish it was. So it took me a while. But I finally got assessed by 2 different tests that are reliable and valid for attachment. And both times came up with a disorganized category. And so that was interesting to me because it didn't fit with what I had been trained to think of disorganization as representing. And so it got me very curious. And I started digging in, and you're absolutely right. It's the stepchild. The research is not really cohesive. It's kind of scattered and feels sometimes a little contradictory or, I don't know, piecemeal. And so it took a while.
I've thought about it as it's a disorganized category. And I think that there's probably different pieces that have been looked at by different researchers. And it's kind of like the elephant thing, everybody's holding something, but it's different. It's not just the one thing. And even the names of it, right? Disoriented, unresolved, disorganized. Carol George was really pushing to call it dysregulated attachment. So thank you for sharing your attachment category. It's a vulnerable thing to do. And it's a great example of how we can know a lot and be insightful and reflective, and that we actually aren't that great at really knowing what that implicit internal working model is. Very, very different than adult attachment.
Yeah, I really identified with the preoccupied category, the way that it was presented to me, that kind of clinging, a lot of anxiety about attachment relationships, being very sensitive to abandonment. It fit my history and it resonated with me. But after I got my AAP done, what I realized was I'm comfortable with that narrative. And I have shame around what I actually do in attachment, which is the defenses that I do utilize are dismissing. And since I had some hang up personally around the idea of dismissing attachment, I wasn't letting myself see that part of myself. And in the disorganized style, of course, you're pulling from both playbooks. So I certainly do use some preoccupied strategies, but if you look at my AAP, I actually use more dismissing strategies. But I think I wasn't as comfortable with that narrative. So part of getting that unresolved category helped me to see the other side of me. And the dismissing defenses were actually the ones that I think were causing more problems in my current relationships. And I wasn't seeing them.
And dismissing is easier to miss than the preoccupied. For sure.
It's so culturally sanctioned. Yeah. I mean, in the American culture, it's pull yourself up by your bootstraps and go achieve something, for God's sake,
Exactly. Move along, don't be needy, all those things. So would you mind sharing a little bit about the ways, I'm thinking more as far as like the test itself, like what things that you discovered in this, like what is the test? And you had mentioned AAP. So that is the Adult Attachment Projective. And we've had Carol George on before. If you're interested in that particular assessment, there's several episodes with her so that you can do a deep dive about this particular instrument, which is fantastic. So that's what we're going to be talking about. But say a little bit more about some of the things that got uncovered.
Well, I was really surprised because I remember after finishing the AAP, and there are the 8 stories that you tell in relation to the pictures. I remember having this feeling, which now is a little painful to think about, but at the time I felt proud because I thought I told good stories. And I thought, oh, look at all that therapy work I've done. I bet I'm going to come out as earned secure. And then getting that classification back of disorganized, I was like, wow, I did not see that coming. Because I consciously remembered during the stories identifying people who would be helping in some way or tying a bow on some of the stories. And I thought, good for me.
Look at that secure story that I was able to generate.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. And I mean, this is my belief, right, about the subconscious mind is that it's designed to protect us from things that are painful. And insight is painful. And so I think my subconscious mind was just doing what it's supposed to do, which is helping me move through the world without beating myself up too much. But those are also my shortcomings. Those are also the pain points in my relationships with people who are important to me. So I needed to be pointed in that direction. And that's really what the AAP did for me. So it pointed me to, my defenses, which I wasn't as aware of, especially those dismissing defenses. And then it also helped me understand in the particular stories where I had trauma markers. I've now learned to code the AAP, although I'm quite the fledgling, but the idea that it's not just the emergence of trauma in the story, it's what you do with it. And the fact that my traumas I wasn't working on them and I wasn't showing any kind of containment or resolution. They were just kind of left hanging. And then, of course, what I think of in that way is that they're ripe for being triggered because they're just sort of sitting there waiting for something to touch into them.
That's right. They're kind of on pause. They're not being processed. Yeah, that's the danger of the dismissing defense is it's so effective that we can just carry these weighted balls with us, not even knowing it. But people around us feeling it, probably not consciously, but that it can be distancing for sure. So what are the kinds of things that the AAP looks for or that you discovered, that were some of those markers, if you don't mind sharing?
Well, it's linguistically coded. So you're looking for particular words or phrases that have been shown in the research to distinguish between the types. So there are certain words or phrases that if you look at, multiple people who are unresolved, they will tend to have more of these particular words or phrases. They can be words like afraid or phrase like curled up in a ball. And so I had more of those markers in my stories where there was a sense of danger or lack of safety or...
Now, were those the trauma markers or
yeah.
those?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
The trauma
right.
markers, yeah.
And so then that moves into that unresolved category, the segregated systems markers. Yeah.
So what have you, what did you used to think that dismissing was? I mean, I'm sorry, not dismissing, disorganized.
So the way that I was trained to think of it was that these were kids who were abused, like outright beaten, locked in closets, sexually abused, parents that were drug addicted, multiple caregivers, foster home, kind of those kinds of histories. And that will certainly lead you to a disorganized style where, there's plenty of research to show that those are risk factors for getting there. But that wasn't my history. I have a pretty typical history in that parents divorced when I was 8, but both my parents are college educated. And, there was the usual readjustment period, but dad stayed involved. And I had a pretty middle class. I went to summer camps and, I was punished by timeouts, which nowadays we don't advocate, but it's certainly not the same thing as getting beaten. So just thought that was very perplexing because I didn't have the level of trauma that I had been trained to believe would produce this. And again, my concern wasn't just about myself. It was also, if I have missed this in me, and I'm a therapist, and every therapist I've ever had has missed this in me, then other therapists are missing it in other people. And that's where I really wanted to come out and explain to people, hey, I'm a version of what disorganization can look like.
What's the difference if a therapist previously had known this or been able to identify it with you, or as you're encouraging therapists to think outside the box with this, how would that change things?
Oh, I think it would have helped my therapist better understand the depth of my struggle. I mean, it's hard to talk about what's really going on in your deep interior world. there can be a lot of shame around just how bad some of the thoughts and feelings can be. And I think even though I tried to be a good therapy client and I tried to be brave and share, I think my therapist could have probed more and been less quick to see me as sturdy. I think I was seen by a lot of therapists as sturdy and bright and insightful. And it's not that those aren't elements of me, but there are a lot of other elements of me that I think there was a little bit of an unconscious collusion between myself and my therapist to emphasize how sturdy and insightful and smart I was without seeing how disorganized I could be at times.
Right, which is a great description of the dismissing defense.
Mm-hmm.
Nothing to see here.
Yeah.
Move on down the road. All good. We're all good.
Right. Yeah. It led to me feeling like it was almost like there were two lives, right? There was a life that I knew on the inside that had emerged in my early adolescence, which could be very depressed and self-destructive and confused and chaotic. And then this other life that was on the outside that was very successful and composed and heavily rewarded by society. And I think that disparity led to a lot of feelings around shame. And also it interferes with your ability to make deep connection, because if you're really going to be close to somebody, you need to feel like they're seeing all of you. And I didn't feel like I could share all of me because I felt like people didn't expect to see those more dysregulated parts of me. So I just wouldn't show them. And then I would get feedback that I was hard to get to know or that I seemed aloof. And I wanted connection. It's just that I didn't realize what was blocking it.
Thanks for listening to this preview of bonus content. If you would like to continue with the episode or to support free worldwide access to important material like this, you can join our online community for as little as $5 a month at therapistsuncensored.com/join. Thanks.